I'll repeat that again. It's not enough, for example, to say that you just did a lab project. You need to expand on the details of the lab project, what the purpose was, what experimental techniques you used, what you learned from it, and how it inspired you to do further reading or reaffirmed your commitment to the subject. Hi everyone, I'm Elvi from ElvisOxfordCoach. I'm an Oxford biochemistry graduate and experienced Oxford and Cambridge University admissions coach and A-level and IB private tutor in chemistry and biology. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about personal statements. Specifically, I'm going to be going through the structured writing process that I use when I work with students in order to help them organize their ideas and write their personal statement most efficiently. In a previous video, I've already analyzed the components, the content that you need to make a convincing and successful personal statement for Oxford and Cambridge. If you haven't seen that video already, please do check it out. In the second half of this video, I'm going to be focusing more specifically on biochemistry applications in terms of how to talk about in detail the extracurricular activities, internships, additional reading that you've done to communicate your knowledge, passion, and interpretation of your subject effectively. As I mentioned earlier, let's start by looking at in detail the structured writing process that I recommend you use for developing your personal statement. So the first thing I want to do is just show this diagram which illustrates the kind of timelines that I recommend students work to when developing a personal statement. So you can see that the extracurricular reading, which is the bit we're going to focus on now, that really begins pretty much as soon as your summer holidays begin. And when it comes to the extracurricular reading or the activities or the internships, what is key here is that while you're doing these activities, you need to be asking deep questions to the people that you're working with or are supervising your work. And you need to be taking notes, right? Why is this important? Because when we get to the next stages of personal development, I outline first draft, how are you going to be able to effectively communicate that you learned something, you understood in detail what you were doing, and not that you were just there participating? Only by having detailed notes that remind you of what you did will you then be able to communicate that effectively in your personal statement. So it's not enough to just watch a lot of TED Talks, read a lot of scientific articles, but if you're not integrating that knowledge, if you're not taking notes, how are you going to be able to effectively communicate the interesting things you learned? I'll repeat that again. It's not enough, for example, to say that you just did a lab project. You need to expand on the details of the lab project, what the purpose was, what experimental techniques you used, what you learned from it, and how it inspired you to do further reading or reaffirmed your commitment to the subject. That's what they're looking for. And we'll discuss more about that in the second half. So by the start of September, which at the time of recording is right now, you should have definitely completed enough extracurricular reading, activities, internship to have content to develop a interesting personal statement from. And so developing a personal statement begins with building an outline. What does that look like? Let's briefly talk through the typical structure that I recommend. So you kind of want to try and identify a theme within your subject. So as we know, Oxford and Cambridge degrees are notoriously broad, history, chemistry, physics, these subjects encapsulate a wide range of things. So you can't talk about everything. So it's good to talk about multiple interests within an overarching theme. So in this case, that could be genetics, and you maybe want to mention about cancer and gene therapies. Okay. And so that theme should run throughout your outline. Um, the introduction, I typically recommend, how students became interested in their subject as a way of starting. You don't have to start with a fancy quote and give an elaborate interpretation of it. Um, and then it's about telling a story. So, how did this inspire you to take action? And what I mean by take action is you learned about something in class, it piqued your curiosity, and you wanted to read or do something at a more advanced level. So maybe you did a EPQ on it, or you spent ages reviewing the literature on this topic, and then maybe you sort of finish off that introductory paragraph by saying how this experience reaffirmed your commitment to studying your subject. And then you go into the main body. And so, the main body is where you're going to be talking about your subject specific and non subject specific extracurriculars. And generally, this is the kind of pattern that I recommend. So, what you did with details, what you learned from it, why it was interesting, or why it's like a paradigm shifting event, or it represents an advancement for humanity, and then ideally how that linked to the next activity that you did. Okay, later in the video we're going to look at some examples of students who developed a really 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 good uh, personal statement paragraph talking about their extracurriculars, and also how you can take an idea from an outline that's not very well developed and make it much more detailed. Um, and then the conclusion, I usually recommend these 3 points. Some people, they find that a conclusion is unnecessary. They want to talk maybe more about their extracurricular activities. That's fine. But I think Oxford and Cambridge, they love big picture thinkers, and if you have a very well structured essay, a mini essay, right? That's your personal statement with an introduction and a conclusion. It can really reinforce the key message, which is, why you think your subject is important. Maybe you can talk about what you'd like to do after graduation, and just reaffirm why you're interested in your subject. So at the outline stage, you shouldn't worry too much about length or having too many ideas. Include things that you're fully convinced by, partially convinced by, and even things that you don't fully understand. Okay, at this stage, this is where I really, really recommend that students work with a mentor. That can be an admissions coach, it could be a private tutor, it could be a parent who has relevant expertise in that subject. It could be a teacher. Whoever that more experienced mentor may be, they're really going to help you evaluate the quality of your ideas, make sure you're not repeating yourself too much. And from there, you can have a pretty much a clear plan of what you're going to say before you actually say it. It's definitely a more efficient writing process to have an outline with ideas that have been vetted by an experienced mentor to then build a full text from, as opposed to not really having a clear idea of which ideas are good without having had any input from anyone, and then just going straight into a full essay, full prose, fretting desperately over writing it in a beautiful way. All that stuff isn't really going to matter if you don't have the right structure and the right ideas and the right content. So I really recommend that students work with someone fairly early in their personal statement development process. So that would be pretty much at the start of September, which at the time of upload of this video is right now. So the first draft is really where, for the first time, you're putting your ideas into continuous text. What I like to do when I work with students here is to make sure that the theme that they've identified that they want to communicate in this personal statement shines through, and that the paragraphs generally connect with each other. Maybe at this stage you'll need to reorder some of your paragraphs so that they fit better with one idea versus another. Um, At this stage, I don't want students to worry about how long their personal statement is. Really, at this stage, it's a waste of time trying to reword and uh, fret about being at 4,000 characters. If you're at 5,000, that's absolutely fine. Okay, get your personal statement into more or less full prose, and then from there you can start to think about shortening if you need to. When I work with students, if at this stage I feel that their personal statement is a bit short or their overall theme, let's say I gave the example of genetics earlier, doesn't touch on different enough examples, at this point I may introduce new ideas, new extracurricular reading for the students to do so that they can explore new topics and have some knowledge to talk about them effectively. So, you know, working with an academic mentor for developing a personal statement is not just about writing and rewording, it's also doing some extracurricular learning, if necessary, to make your personal statement more complete, more competitive, because you don't want to just focus on one single thing in your personal statement. That makes you seem like a single issue person. As I said, you want to have an overarching theme and have like multiple topics or pieces of research or wherever it may be that fits into that thing. So at the second draft stage, I don't particularly recommend that students add new ideas beyond the ones that I would recommend including from a review of the initial first draft. By this stage, the ideas, the content should be more or less complete. What I look for when I'm reviewing a second draft is I sort of analyze line by line very carefully how the students have used key terminology? Have they used them accurately, or have they used them sufficiently enough? Are they being too vague with their descriptions of what they've learnt? Also, things like scientific accuracy, use of abbreviations appropriately. You can't just assume that the admissions tutor is going to know that abbreviation. Maybe that is in a very, very niche subfield of your overall subject. Another very important thing I like to do when reviewing a second draft of a student's personal statement is to make sure that all the extracurricular activities, be they subject specific or non subject specific, have some kind of justification. What do I mean by that? Your personal statement is not a CV, which is like a list of bullet points, like I did this, then I did this, then I did this. It's about focusing on each idea and then expanding upon it. So, did you actually comment on what you learned from it? Did you comment on what was your role if it was like a project in a group? Um, did you comment on why you think this is significant? Why this research could help? You know, give a breakthrough that maybe improves things for humanity in general. So let's just take a quick recap of the timeline. So, you want to have your final draft ready probably by the start of October, end of September. At this point, you've done the vast majority of the work, researching, doing all the extracurricular activities, then planning your outline, and then writing that first draft. At this stage, it's just about adding the final touches. So what I do when reviewing a final draft is really a very deep editorial style review. I'm checking every word. Okay, I'm making sure there's no spelling, grammar, repetition of ideas, repetition of phrases that maybe makes your writing sound clunky. Perhaps the personal statement is a little bit over the limit. I tell my students to not worry about that. Okay, as an experienced medical writer, I'm used to cramming scientific information into 250 word abstracts. So if your personal statement is, let's say, 300 characters or 500 characters over the limit, don't enter in a panic. Okay. Don't think you have to start deleting ideas. Just think carefully about how you can reword things, how you can merge ideas. So we're going to now take a look at an example of a personal statement, some paragraphs from a student who I worked with, and they were successful in their application to studying biochemistry at Oxford. And so I've color coded the paragraphs in three sections. So we have the what was done, okay, what the student did, uh, bridging statement. So, I did this activity and then this led to, and then also um, interpretation, reflection, commentary, learning. What should stand out to you is that most of the paragraph is dedicated to interpretation, reflection, or commentary. Okay, like I said, the personal statement is not a CV where you list bullet points trying to show off. It's more about reflecting on the activities you did and why they reaffirmed your commitment, your passion to your subject. So, for example, I think this sentence is really great because it shows that the student has understood that RNA is multifunctional. Okay, not only is RNA the carrier of information in terms of transcription that everyone learns about at school, but the student's gone one step further to talk about mRNA as a regulator of other genes and also its enzymatic function. Okay, so the other thing that I would also highlight about this student's personal statement is that there's a lot of detailed uh, terminology, and so these are the ones that I've highlighted in bold. Essentially, what the student has done here is sort of name dropped different, proteins, processes, concepts that essentially pique the interest of the admissions tutor. They want to test to see, does this student actually know all these things that they're talking about? It gives them an incentive to invite the student to interview. So if you don't have much detail, you're not using key terminology, the admissions tutors are just going to assume you didn't really understand what you did or what you read, or that you engaged with it in a superficial way. As an example of an outline bullet point that I received in the outline draft from a student that I've worked with. Okay, so we've got the full bullet here. In the research I did for my presentation, I found a piece of research where the investigators used CRISPR to inactivate two proteins in their cells, which increases the replicative ability of those cells indefinitely. This renders them fit for the industrial production of proteins. So, what could be improved here? It's not that specific. Okay, so which two proteins? What type of cells? Okay, and what is the connection between the genetic modification and these cells now being able to uh, divide indefinitely? And in the session that I had with the student to improve their outline, what we did was essentially work together to try and extract more information. So I was able to find out the original research paper, the abstract for that research paper that the student had referred to. And it turned out that the two proteins in question were tumor suppressor genes. Okay. And what the researchers had done was inhibit the action of those proteins using CRISPR to induce a point mutation, either an insertion or a deletion, that essentially disrupts the DNA sequence of those genes, therefore leading to non functional proteins. So, tumor suppressor genes, as we know, halt progression through the cell cycle. What's more, they had also genetically introduced the gene that codes for the protein telomerase. Telomerase is an enzyme that elongates the telomeres, bits of DNA on the ends of chromosomes, that allows cells to achieve replicative immortality. They had made these cells immortal and non-responsive to any inhibitions of the cell cycle. Okay, and this explains that indefinite replication that the student had mentioned about. Hopefully, that was a really useful video that covers everything you need to know about what I would recommend for developing a personal statement, and also some really detailed examples of how to talk about your extracurricular activities in biochemistry, really emphasizing the interpretation of the facts, what you learned from it, and not just stating a list of If you found this video useful and helpful and would like further personalized one-to-one support, you can find me at www.elvisoxfordcoach.com. Whether it's a consultation regarding whether to apply at Oxford or Cambridge, whether it's to decide between biochemistry or chemistry, or whether you've already decided that you're confident that you want to apply for biochemistry and you need help with your personal statement, regardless of what stage of development you're at, please do get in touch and we can book a session and help you to progress your application. Thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you can integrate some of these great tips when developing your personal statement.